He skipped our daughter's 7th birthday party to take a work call. That's what he told me anyway. Work call. He said it so easily, so casually, like he'd said it 100 times before. And I realized, standing there in our kitchen holding a cake with pink frosting and 7 unlit candles, that he probably had. I didn't say anything. I lit the candles myself. I sang happy birthday. I watched my daughter Lily blow them out and make a wish, her eyes squeezed shut so tight like she really believed it would come true. I smiled the whole time. I took pictures. I did everything a mother is supposed to do at a birthday party. But I heard him, through the walls of our house, through the noise of 7-year-olds running around in the backyard. I heard him laugh. Not a professional laugh. Not the kind you do when a client says something mildly amusing. It was the laugh he used to save for me. Low and genuine and a little bit warm. I stood in my kitchen and listened to my husband laugh like that for someone else. And I thought, I know that sound. His name is Fletcher. We'd been married 9 years. We met in our late 20s, both of us working in the same mid-sized company in Columbus, Ohio. He was in finance. I was in operations. He was the kind of man who remembered how you took your coffee and showed up with it without being asked. He remembered everything back then. The date we first talked about moving in together. The name of my childhood dog. The way I always ordered the same thing at restaurants because I hated making decisions when I was hungry. I fell in love with his attention. I didn't realize until much later that his attention was also what made him dangerous. We got married on a Saturday in October. It rained, which my mother said was good luck. We bought a house in a suburb 20 minutes outside the city, a 4-bedroom with a backyard big enough for a garden I always meant to start. Lily was born 2 years later. I went part-time at work. Fletcher got promoted, then promoted again. Life moved the way life moves. In small steps you don't fully register until you look back and barely recognize where you started. Somewhere in year 6, he became someone I had to schedule time with. I told myself it was the job. He'd moved into a senior director role, and the hours were brutal. I told myself we were just in a phase, the kind every long marriage moves through. I read the articles, I listened to the podcasts. I tried the date nights and the weekend getaways and the conversation prompts from Marriage Book my sister gave me as a joke Christmas gift that I secretly read cover to cover. None of it worked, because I was trying to fix a problem I hadn't correctly identified yet. The woman's name was Brooke. I didn't know that at first. I didn't know anything for a while, only that something had shifted in a way I couldn't name precisely. He was present in our house the way furniture is present, there, taking up space, technically part of the home but not really with me. My friend Tamsin was the one who noticed first. She'd known Fletcher since before we were married, had always liked him, never said a bad word about him, but at a dinner the 4 of us had last spring, she pulled me into the bathroom and said very quietly, "Has he always been on his phone that much?" I said yes. I said it was work. She looked at me for a second too long and said, "Okay." I thought about that okay for a week. After Lily's birthday, I started paying closer attention. Not in a paranoid way, at least not at first, just noticing things I'd trained myself to stop noticing. He came home late 3 nights a week minimum, and always had a reason. He'd switched his phone to silent, which he'd never done before. He started going to the gym at 6 in the morning, which he'd also never done before. But the thing was, he never seemed more fit. He'd shower immediately when he got home from anywhere. Not always, but enough. Small things. The kind of things that, alone, mean nothing. But stacked on top of each other, arranged in a pattern, they start to mean everything. I want to be clear. I didn't start this from a place of certainty. I started it from a place of not being able to sleep. I started writing things down. Dates and times, when he said he was somewhere versus what I could verify. It felt obsessive and I hated doing it, and I kept doing it anyway, because the alternative was lying in the dark beside him pretending everything was fine, and I'd already spent 2 years doing that. It was Tamsin's husband, Greg, who actually confirmed it. He'd been at a conference in Cincinnati in March, the same conference Fletcher said he'd be attending. Greg came home a day early. Fletcher did not. Greg didn't tell me right away. He told Tamsin. Tamsin told me she needed to come over, that it was important. She sat across from me at my kitchen table with her hands wrapped around a mug of tea she wasn't drinking, and she said, "Greg didn't see Fletcher at the conference. Not once. Not the whole 3 days." I said, "Are you sure?" She said, "He checked with 2 other people who were there. Nobody saw him." I sat with that for a minute. Then I said, "Okay." And she looked at me the same way I'd looked at her 8 months earlier, and she said, "What are you going to do?" I said I didn't know yet. I said I needed to think. What I actually did was go online that same night and find a licensed private investigator in Columbus. I'd never looked into that before. Never thought I would be the kind of person who needed to, and I booked a consultation for that Friday. I want to be honest about something. I felt ashamed, not because I was doing something wrong, but because I'd somehow absorbed the idea that needing proof meant I was weak or paranoid or that I'd failed at my marriage. I sat in that PI's office, a woman named Helen, practical and no-nonsense, not unkind, and I gave her what I had, my notes, the dates, the gaps. She listened without surprise and without judgment. She quoted me a rate, I paid it. I didn't tell Fletcher anything changed. I went home and made dinner and helped Lily with her reading homework and asked my husband how his day was. He said fine. He asked how mine was. I said fine. We watched television for an hour and went to bed. I lay there in the dark while he fell asleep beside me, and I thought, I'm going to find out the truth, and then I'm going to decide what to do with it. In that order, not before. That was important to me, the order. I needed to know first. I'd spent too long acting on guesses. Helen took 3 weeks. She sent me a report on a Thursday afternoon. Photos, dates, locations, all of it documented. Brooke was 31. She worked in marketing at a firm downtown. She and Fletcher had been meeting for at least 8 months. Probably longer, at a hotel on the west side, and twice at an apartment I didn't recognize. I sat in my car in the parking garage at work and looked at the photos and felt something move through me that I didn't have a name for. Not pure grief, not pure rage, something more like the ground shifting, like a version of my life quietly collapsing, and another one waiting to be built. I called Tamsin. She didn't say I told you so. She just said, tell me what you need. I said, I need a really good divorce attorney. She had one in 20 minutes. Her name was Patricia Wells, and she had a 4.9-star Google rating and a consultation slot the following Tuesday. I want to describe to you what it was like to sit across from my husband every night for 6 weeks and know what I knew while he knew nothing. I don't recommend it, but I also learned something important about myself during those weeks. I was capable of more patience than I'd ever given myself credit for. I could keep a secret. I could smile at the right moments. I could ask how the salmon tasted and mean it, or at least say it so convincingly it didn't matter. What was happening on the other side of that composure was a very careful process of untangling a life. Patricia walked me through everything. Joint accounts, the mortgage, the investment portfolio Fletcher managed. All of it. I'd been financially dependent in ways I hadn't fully examined because I'd trusted him with that part of our life, the way I'd trusted him with a lot of things, and I was done trusting him with anything that was also mine. I spoke with my HR department about moving back to full-time. I updated my resume. I contacted my old manager who'd moved to a firm downtown 3 years ago, a woman named Lois, and she said they'd been thinking about creating a new operations role and that my timing was actually interesting. I opened an account at a different bank, in my name only. I moved 6 months of living expenses into it, money that was legally mine, money I'd saved from my paychecks over the years into an account Fletcher had technically had access to, but never looked at, because he'd always assumed I was handling small things and he was handling big ones. I was done letting that assumption go unchallenged. I did all of this quietly and without drama, and I went to bed every night next to a man who thought everything was fine. The one thing I hadn't planned perfectly was Lily. She was 7 and observant in the way children are when they've been loved carefully. She noticed things, felt shifts in atmosphere, asked questions that caught me off guard. One night she asked me why Daddy was always on his phone at dinner now. I said he's been busy with work, Bug. She said he looks sad sometimes. I said I'm just tired, baby. I love you so much. She climbed into my lap, which she was really getting too big for. and I held on to her and breathed through the next few minutes until I felt steady again. I'd made a decision early on that I was going to protect her from this completely for as long as I could, and that when the time came to explain it, I would do it with honesty and without making her feel like she had to choose sides or manage anyone's emotions. I practiced what I'd say. I ran it past Patricia and a family therapist I'd quietly started seeing on Tuesday mornings, while Fletcher thought I had a standing coffee with a work friend. The papers were filed on a Wednesday. Patricia had suggested serving him at home, but I'd asked if we could time it differently. I wasn't interested in a scene in front of Lily. What I wanted was simpler and honestly more satisfying in a way I'm not ashamed to admit. Fletcher had a quarterly presentation that Friday, a big one to the executive team and 2 external partners. He'd been talking about it for weeks. It was the kind of meeting he dressed differently for, the kind where everything had to go perfectly. I knew the time, I knew the building, I knew exactly how to make sure the process server had all the access they needed. He was served at 10:47 in the morning in a conference room on the 14th floor in front of his director and 2 external partners and 3 of his junior colleagues. I was at a coffee shop 6 blocks away. Tamsin sat across from me, and we didn't talk much. We just drank our coffee and waited. My phone stayed face up on the table. At 10:52, it lit up with a call from Fletcher. I let it go to voicemail. Then again at 10:53. Then a text. We need to talk. Then, Clara, please call me. I picked up the coffee cup and took a sip. It was good coffee, actually. A little too hot, but I didn't mind. Tamsin looked at me. You okay? I said. Yeah, I actually am. He called 4 more times that afternoon. The voicemails got progressively less composed. The first was controlled. He said there must be some misunderstanding. He wanted to talk about this like adults. The second was quieter, more careful, like he was trying to sound reasonable while recalibrating. By the third, something had cracked open. He said he knew he'd made mistakes. He said he was sorry. He used the word mistake twice. Like if he said it enough times, it might reclassify what had actually happened. Mistake, I'd thought about this word. A mistake is a wrong turn. A mistake is a typo. What Fletcher had done was something he'd chosen, repeatedly, over the course of at least 8 months. And probably longer. On work trips and weekday afternoons, and in the stolen hours after he'd come home and kissed my daughter on the forehead and sat down at our dinner table. That was not a mistake. That was a series of decisions, each one small enough to feel survivable to him and large enough, stacked together, to hollow out everything we built. I didn't call him back. I had Patricia handle all of it from that point forward. That's what she was there for, and she was exceptional. Fletcher hired his own attorney, of course. There were negotiations over the house. We ended up selling it, splitting the equity, which gave me the down payment for a place of my own in a neighborhood I'd always liked, close to Lily's school. The investment portfolio division took longer and required a forensic accountant, which I'd anticipated because I'd done my homework. He asked through his attorney if we could talk privately just once. Patricia advised against it. I declined. I'm not going to tell you the aftermath was clean or easy. That would be dishonest, and I promised myself this wouldn't be dishonest. There were nights, more than a few, when Lily was asleep, and the new house was quiet in the way it hadn't been, when I was lonely inside my marriage but felt different now, just quiet instead of hollow, and I sat on the kitchen floor with a glass of wine and cried. Not for Fletcher specifically, more for the version of my life I thought I was building. For the Saturday in October when it rained and my mother said that was good luck. For the 4-bedroom house with the backyard garden I never planted. I let myself cry. Then I got up. The job was Lois, came through in June. Full-time operations director, real salary, actual health insurance in my name. My first day back I wore a blazer I'd bought myself and I drove to the office and I sat at my desk and I thought, this is mine. No one can take this. Lily started seeing a family therapist, a kind woman who worked with kids and who Lily, after 2 sessions, declared was pretty cool, actually. She adjusted better than I'd feared. Children are more resilient than we give them credit for, especially when the adults around them are honest about the shape of things without unloading the weight of it on small shoulders. Fletcher sees her every other weekend. He shows up on time, which I'll give him. Whether he tells her he's sorry for what he did to their family, that's between them. It's not something I can control, and I've learned to make peace with what I can't control. Brooke, for what it's worth, did not get what she'd apparently been hoping for. I found out through a mutual work acquaintance, completely by chance, I wasn't looking, that she and Fletcher lasted about 4 months after the divorce was filed. I don't know the details and I didn't ask for them. I just noted it the way you note weather. Oh, sure, of course. What I do know is that I ran into her once, about 8 months later, at a coffee place near the office. We recognized each other, not from having met, but from the particular way you recognize a stranger who's been described to you in photographs. She looked at me. I looked at her, and then I picked up my order and walked out because I had somewhere to be and she had absolutely nothing to do with my life. That's the thing nobody tells you about the other side of this. It gets boring eventually, in the best possible way. The drama drains out of it. The people who caused you the most pain become people you ran into once at a coffee shop and then forgot about before you even got back to your car. Last October, Willie turned 8. We had the party at the new house, our house, and I made a chocolate cake this time instead of pink frosting because she decided she was more of a chocolate person now, which she announced at breakfast with complete seriousness. All 7 of her friends showed up. Tamsin brought her kids. My sister flew in from Portland. We ate too much cake and the kids ran around the backyard screaming, and at some point I stood at the kitchen window watching all of it, and I noticed I was smiling without trying. I lit the candles. I sang Happy Birthday. Lily squeezed her eyes shut and made her wish. I didn't have to wonder if she was wishing her parents were still together. I know my daughter. She was wishing for a puppy. We talked about it. I said maybe by spring. There's something people don't talk about enough when it comes to betrayal, how much of the damage is done not in one dramatic moment, but in all the small ones before it. Fletcher didn't break our marriage on the day I found out. He broke it slowly, in the way he stopped looking at me when I talked, in the way he laughed differently on the phone, and the way he stood in our kitchen and let our daughter's birthday become background noise while he gave his real attention somewhere else. I used to think the worst part was being cheated on. I don't think that anymore. The worst part was how long I told myself I was wrong, how many times I reached for a reasonable explanation because the unreasonable one was too heavy to hold. We do that. Most of us do, because the truth requires you to act, and acting means your life will never look the same again. And that's terrifying, even when the life you're protecting has already been hollowed out. What I learned is the clarity, when it finally comes, is not a feeling. It doesn't arrive warm or gentle. It arrives the way cold water does, sudden and total. The night Tamsin sat at my kitchen table and told me what Greg hadn't seen at that conference, something in me went very still. Not broken. Still. Like a decision had already been made somewhere deeper than my conscious mind, and the rest of me was just catching up. I made a choice after that to operate from intelligence rather than emotion. Not because I didn't have emotions. I had enormous ones, the kind that showed up at 2 in the morning and wouldn't leave, but because I knew that acting from rage would only serve Fletcher. It would make me the problem. It would give him something to manage instead of something to answer for. So I got quiet. I got organized. I got a PI, then an attorney, then a financial plan, then a job. I rebuilt the infrastructure of my life while he sat at our dinner table and assumed everything was fine, because that's what he trained himself to believe. That's not revenge. I want to be clear about that. It was never about punishing him. It was about making sure that when I walked out with everything that was mine, my financial stability, my sense of self, my daughter's security, my ability to stand on my own without needing anything from a man who had already shown me what he thought I was worth. The thing about people who gaslight you is that they depend on your chaos. They need you crying in the kitchen, sending the angry texts, making the dramatic scenes, because all of that keeps the focus on your reaction instead of their behavior. The moment you stop reacting and start thinking, you change the entire equation. You become someone they don't know how to handle. Fletcher didn't know how to handle me by the time those papers arrived, because the woman he thought he'd married, the one who'd go quiet and forgive and move on, wasn't there anymore. She'd been replaced, slowly and deliberately, by someone who'd looked hard at what she'd accepted and decided she was done. Lily is 8 now. She has a good life. She has a mother who shows up fully, and a home that feels like safety, and that matters more to me than anything Fletcher took or tried to take. What he did had consequences, not because the universe punished him, but because choices always carry weight, and eventually that weight lands somewhere. It landed. I was just no longer standing underneath it when it did.